SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Dave Becker, CEO and founder of CampusESP. It's a SaaS that provides an all-in-one parent engagement solution for colleges and universities. Hey, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ken, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We're really excited to record this episode with you. Before we dig in, could you just give us some background on yourself and CampusESP, please?
Yeah, I've been in education technology for 25 years, from student information systems to CRM and engagement. And CampusESP helps colleges and universities engage with parents and families so that schools can have more influence over where students enroll, but also whether and how they succeed getting through that college journey. Parents are really influential in the college application and through the college journey. So we help schools navigate that.
Well, that's terrific. And when we talked before, you told me that the path you guys took was as a bootstrap, and you've been something of an overnight success, right, on that path?
Yeah, overnight success is definitely, everything's in the definition. Everything from the outside looking in seems glitzy and fast moving, but there's a lot of work that went into it. And yeah, being bootstrapped doesn't mean that we didn't try to raise money. Frankly, we tried to raise money and we were not able to raise money. So we just bootstrapped it and we basically grew off of customers, which is great. And now we're in a place where we have over 260 schools using CampusESP. Over 4 million parents get communication from those schools through CampusESP. And as you said, now we're an overnight success.
Yeah, only like 9 years later.
Right.
But I want to encourage you. I think we mentioned this when we talked before. Most of the overnight successes we've had the pleasure of working with are somewhere between like 6 and 8 years to where things really start taking off. So I think you're just a successful startup company that took a normal glide path. So
yeah, I advise other startup entrepreneurs, and I always say, however long you think it's going to take you twice as long. If somebody tells you, it took me 2 years to get to where I'm at, more than likely it's taken them 4 years. And we have that same journey at CampusESP. I go back into my email and look at parent engagement. It's from back in 2013, where I was just researching the problem. And then when did I jump into it full time? It was really 2017. So depending on what you consider, the starting point of CampusESP, it could be 5 years or it could be 9 years. And I think that's the same thing with a lot of startups, a lot of SaaS startups, which is, a lot of people do it nights and weekends to start, to really get going. And I think that's pretty normal.
Yeah, I think the side hustle path to entrepreneurship is well worn, and not everybody can afford to give up their day job to pursue a passion of a startup. So it makes a lot of sense. I'd love to understand about the attempt on the venture raise. Can you give a little visibility into why that didn't work out and what you took away from that?
I think I'm just bad at raising venture money because I have a lot of experience in ed tech, which means I have a lot of opinions. And, when you're pitching organizations, you have a lot of other experts there that think they know as well. So some of it is just, it's tough. Right? You have to recognize that they're going through a lot of deal flow. They're seeing at least 200 deals each year, 200 companies, probably a lot more than that. And they have to make determination and they have to make quick responses to the requests that are out there. In CampusESP's position, there was really nobody doing what we're doing. We were creating a market segment, which is college parent involvement. So there was a lot of education. And because we're creating this segment, there's a lot of risk. And, that story, if I was to raise money now, I could probably raise money right now. But 8 years ago when there wasn't that much traction and it was tough. So a lot of times I think, people don't choose to bootstrap a lot of times. They are people who tried to raise money who weren't able to raise money, but were so passionate about the solution that they had and the problem that needed solving that they're just like, screw it, I'm going to go in it alone. And that's really what happened with CampusESP.
So was that so you were already operating the business, so it was just like you were trying to get the venture money to accelerate growth. Is that right?
Yeah, those first couple customers are really difficult. Like I would say anything before 10 customers, you're grinding. And I have, this might be sharing too much, but like I'm pretty emotional and it was really, really tough. And in my bathroom at home, I have a hole in the door where I just punched the door. There's literally a hole at eye level. And by the way, these are really cheap doors from like Home Depot that like almost anybody can punch through. I'm not saying I'm like amazing at punching, but there's a hole in there. And my wife's like, you ever going to repair that hole? And I tell her no. I was like, that to me is a reminder of how hard it was those early years, because as you progress through SaaS, as you grow a company, now we have 40 employees. Back in those days, it was just one or two of us. And it was really hard. And that hole kind of keeps me grounded. It's a reminder how hard this is. And I think that's what people sign up for. Now that things are going great, I love having those stories about how hard it was and how people rejected me and I'm able to prove them wrong. So I don't know, maybe that's just the anger inside me, but it drives me forward.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if any of those people you pitched, any of those VCs you pitched have come back to you.
We just had our annual user group meeting and we had close to 150 people register, we're a small company. That was amazing.
That is amazing.
And at the kickoff, I told the story of the person who I went to. She's pretty high up at University of Pennsylvania in the Graduate School of Education. And she told me parent involvement's a fad. And she's like, I don't think you have a company here. And so that was my kickoff speech to the community, which is like, we're no longer a fad. We went from fad to nice to have to need to have. And, that's a whole journey. That's a whole journey that we went through over these last 9 years, which is educating people, then educating them on the problem, educating them on the solution, and then positioning ourselves as a solution. And that's a lot of work. And, I'm proud of it. And it's a unique story.
That is awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about something you mentioned in our prep about what else you needed to get through that crunch. You talked about, needing support around you. And I thought that was really useful insight, if you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah. You always hear with startups that you need to have a great team, but that team starts day one, idea day zero, in my opinion, which is, your team, might not think about it, but I have a spouse, a partner who is amazing, who was working during all this, and she was part of my team. I was able to jump in and bootstrap CampusESP without taking a salary for a long time. In those early days, I was also part of an accelerator and then an incubator. And then, I was around other people that even though they weren't directly connected to CampusESP, they were my support network. And sometimes it's just like group therapy to just keep going and to talk with other people that are going to keep nudging you along the path. Then we had advisors. We had formal advisors that believed in the mission of CampusESP and were able to make connections. Then we had a couple early employees. So that support network, that team, you need to have that in place day one. I think, for somebody who's in their 40s like me, I was able to assemble that team pretty quickly. For people who are in their 20s, you might not have that team. That might be a little bit more difficult. And that's where like energy really comes into play and like just pushing forward. So it's an interesting challenge. There's no way you could build a company and do it by yourself. You need to have people around you that are going to support you.
That's very cool. I wanted to ask you about the environment you're operating in. Recently in the news on the incoming class sizes is going to go down, right? Demography is working against some of the colleges and universities. And how does that play for CampusESP? Are you viewing that as an opportunity or a threat or both?
Probably more of an opportunity, I would say. There's this notion of the demographic cliff that's out there from an enrollment perspective, which is there's just going to be less students that are going to college based off of birth rates and different demographics out there. If you say the year 2025 to any enrollment or marketing manager, they're going to like look up and be like, oh boy, that's where it's really supposed to start. So enrollment is a challenge. That's the problem that we're ultimately solving, whether it's retention or recruitment or yield. We feel like parents play a role. So we have a very creative solution that is almost like a no-brainer. Of course, you want to reach out to parents and families to influence enrollment. And I think in some ways, the demographic cliff, in the same way that COVID actually has helped us a bunch too, which is more and more enrollment pressure. Everybody has that enrollment pressure. And so they're looking for solutions that can help them move the needle quickly.
Yeah, I thought you might say something like that. It seems to me that parents are super influential in the decisions their kids make about college, right? From a life experience point of view, sometimes paying some, much, or all of the freight. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways parents can be an important ally to the admissions people who are ultimately building those classes.
Yeah, I agree with that statement a lot. I really do think, I mean, there's a lot that's happening in the world right now. So lots of reasons why parents are involved. But what I typically go back to, it's the cost of education. It is more than it's ever been. There's more loans going out. And a lot of times families are involved in those loans. So when you hear the term student success, for a lot of families, it means family success. And as much as everybody wants to have their students be independent and be able to think creatively and all those things, they also can't let them fail. Like, it's too important. It's too expensive. So parents are just going to be involved. I always say that that's the reason why parent involvement is increasing. It's just the cost of education.
That's an interesting notion. It's too expensive to fail, right? I mean, for a family, it's a huge investment. And for many families, the son or daughter in college represents an important part of the whole future for the family. So makes sense. When we talked before, you said initially you were focused on the students, right? And can you just give a little kind of description of the initial focus and how you came to realize that maybe that was the wrong side of the equation?
Yeah, well, in a former life, I was actually at Ellucian, which many of your listeners probably have. And I was there for 14 years. And I knew coming out of there, I wanted to stay in education technology, very passionate about student success. So when you think about student success, of course, you focus on the students. And you think, okay, how can we build a better way to engage students? And so I visited some friends of mine, and one of those people in the very early days was like, students aren't even going in and checking financial aid or anything like that. It's their parents that are going in and logging in as them into the student information system. And I was blown away by that. And so that was our very, very first early pivot where, okay, if we're trying to influence student success, why do it directly? Why not go through the parents and the families to influence student success? So we started looking at that. And by we, I mean I, because there was nobody else working on the company at that point. So I started researching it, and really for 2 years, from 2013 to 2015, I would just go to conferences. I would work with schools, and we would do what I called parent engagement surveys, where we would just survey parents. And I just started to understand the problem a little bit more and how involved parents were and how schools were dealing with it. So those first 2 years were just research. There was no portal being built. There was no code being deployed. And that gave us a really strong data-based foundation for building CampusESP.
So was that missionary work, or were the campuses helping pay for that?
A little bit of both. There was 14 schools those early days. I think about half of them paid me to come out and do a parent engagement review. And we would go through about 40 questions. At the end of the day, across all those schools, I compiled 8,000 parent responses and probably did about 40 interviews directly with parents. And we had some amazing stats that even to this day, I always call back to, which is, I believe it's 63% of parents said that they had their students' IDs and passwords in college, right? So that's scary. And that's something that blew me away. There was another one that was interesting to me, which is after your student graduates, do you want to stay involved with your students' college? 25% say no. That seemed reasonable, right? 25% said yes. Seemed crazy. And then 50% said maybe. And I was like, that's another opportunity around giving and internships and career support and mentorship. So these stats really became my North Star as we were building this solution. And even to this day in presentations, I call back to that 8,000 parent survey.
Is there a possibility of rerunning those surveys? It's a leading question because we've encountered plenty of CEOs, entrepreneurs who use the survey as a way to position themselves as a resource to the industry, right? It's a thought leadership exercise.
Right.
And it sounds like that's that kind of data that would be so valuable.
This is what's interesting about it. So of that group, 14 schools that invested in that survey, their parents, in some cases, their time, their resources. Only 3 became customers for CampusESP. So there was a disconnect between doing this research and them implementing the solution. So it didn't become critical from a sales and marketing perspective for me. But as far as the thought leadership goes, yes, we actually partner with Ruffalo Noel Levitz, and every year we do a survey that goes into parent involvement levels, maybe at a little bit higher perspective, just to like make sure that people in marketing and enrollment understand that these parents, their involvement expectations, their communication expectations are increasing. And one of the stats, I'm looking over here at the stats, 85% of parents expect weekly communication from their students' college or university, which is crazy. And by the way, a year before, when we ran that, it was 76%. And a year before that, in 2020, it was 64%. So it went from 64 to 76 to 85%. So it's increasing. So we just stay at high level stats without getting into all the detail. But yeah, data and thought leadership is a big part of what we do at CampusESP.
So I just want to flip the script for you a little bit. You got 20% of your survey participants to become clients of a very young company. So
yeah.
I think that's an accomplishment. I think that's pretty good.
It's probably though when I punch the hole in the door, which is like, how come I can't get them all to sign up? It felt like they should all jump over, especially when you have some crazy stats that just shows how involved they are and what an opportunity it is. I think for education leaders though, I mean, they have an endless list of priorities and they have to decide what moves the needle. And back then, 7 years ago, it didn't seem as critical as maybe it does now. Now I do feel like parent engagement is more of a need to have, especially coming out of COVID and enrollment pressures and things like that.
So let's talk a little bit more about marketing, because you had a positioning that you ended up kind of running away from, which was talking about like the super involved parents.
So we only have one.
The early tagline.
The early tag, and actually we only have one piece of intellectual property, and it is a tagline that I was very proud of myself that I created back in the day. It was, we give helicopter parents a place to land, and it made sense, right? And we would go to conferences like NACAC and NASPA and EDUCAUSE, and we would have a giant helicopter with that phrase, and people would love it. They would come up and they'd get pictures in the booth. It was really great, and it was horrible. It was the wrong tagline because it just kind of decreased our value, right? We weren't trying to give them a place to land. We were trying to turn them into partners. So now our tagline is turn parents into partners, or we help you nudge the nudgers, parents being the ultimate nudgers, or the difference is a parent, which has got a little bit of a wordplay thing in there. But that helicopter thing sounded so great, but as we understood the value that we could create on the enrollment side, we really needed to move away from it, because at the end of the day, no parent's trying to be a helicopter parent. They're trying to be a partner. They're trying to help. And so that repositioning really helped us over the last couple of years to talk about the value behind parent engagement.
It makes sense now when you look back at it that the idea that you can create a bond with a parent would seem high value, right? So it's sort of almost like an inside joke, the original tagline, right?
Well, you want to solve problems. So it seemed like the problem, which is like too many parent calls, too much parent involvement. But I don't know if parent involvement is the problem as much as like, where are they focused? Where are they focusing their energy? So that became the narrative, which is like, look, you're not going to change parent involvement levels, right? You're not going to tell that parent to back off. You're not going to set what they think is the right level of involvement. But if you can focus it, so they know how to support their student and when to get involved with like maybe the FAFSA, or when to nudge them to get support that they need because they're struggling in school. All those things around redirecting that parent energy became more of the focus for our positioning.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the mentoring that you do with other startups. What are the things you're seeing in these younger companies, and what are the really important lessons you try and bring into those scenarios? It may not be a general thing, may have to draw from specifics here, but I just wonder what you're seeing in these mentor-mentee relationships.
That's such a big question, I would say, and it really depends on the entrepreneur, their experience level. But what I try to encourage them to do is to create a business plan. I know that seems so basic, but a fully fleshed out business plan includes financial projections. And that seems to be where they really fall a lot of times, because it's hard work. And the reality is nobody's going to look at the business plan except for the entrepreneur. But you need to put it on paper so that you can scrutinize your own plan and identify the risks and come up with mitigations for those risks. So I usually try to say, okay, where's your business plan? And they'll have like maybe 2 pages. And I'm like, okay, well, where are the financials? Where's the forecast? How does this all make sense at the end of the day? Because I mean, it's a long journey. It's going to take an entrepreneur twice as long as they think every single time. And you need to have a good foundation for where you're trying to go. I can tell you the CampusESP business plan, I can't believe it. I go back to it today and it is very accurate to where we're at today. And a lot of that came from my experience just having done education technology for a long time. But for younger entrepreneurs who are just getting started, that business plan is really, really crucial.
So you went from a kind of a 9 to 5, kind of in air quotes, but you went from a job to entrepreneuring, right?
Yeah.
Are the people that you talk to in that same scenario often? Is that where these people are? Or are they serial entrepreneurs still needing to hit, their first success?
I think most successful entrepreneurs start as a side hustle, and they are getting it's very tough to just hit the reset button and be successful. And actually, let me take a step back. This is my 3rd startup. So my first startup was in wearable tech jewelry. I had no business doing it whatsoever. I really don't know anything about wearable tech or jewelry, but I did it because it was exciting to me. And I was kind of at like, I don't know, maybe midlife crisis kind of point. That failed, but I would do it over again. Absolutely. And then my second startup, I was COO for a company called Scali, which was on Shark Tank. It was funded on Shark Tank, and it helps match students to financial aid. That was more in my wheelhouse. That was better. And then CampusESP, which I've been successful with, but it's a journey. So I think for a lot of folks, they start off nights and weekends because they have to. You don't have the resources just to say, hey, I'm going to just try this super risky thing. You need to think about where you're going and really, where you're trying to get to as well.
So what happened to the Scali startup?
So Scali, I'm based in Philadelphia. They eventually moved to Los Angeles. I'm pretty sure I was the oldest person on that team, and I had a family, and I was like, I'm not moving to Los Angeles. So they're doing great. They're crushing it right now in LA. And that was always my jumping off point to CampusESP. But even when I was working on Scali, I was kind of doing some of those parent engagement reviews on the side for CampusESP. The CEO of Scali knew I was doing that. He knew, I was still working full time, but like I said, nights and weekends, I was kind of testing things out with CampusESP. So when they moved to the West Coast, it was the natural jumping off point for me.
Interesting. Well, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here, and I really appreciate your time. If folks want to talk with you, reach out to you about their own startups or any of the subjects we talked about today, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, just dave@campusesp.com. Happy to help provide stories, and especially if you're in education technology, provide, connections if I can help.
Awesome. And the website is campusesp.com. And folks want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn /in/Ken Lempit or KL@austinlawrence.com. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do. Available pretty much wherever podcasts are distributed these days. Hey, Dave, thanks again for a great episode. Really appreciate your time.
Ken, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.